God in His wisdom has selected this group of men to be the purveyors of His goodness. In selecting them through whom to bring this phenomenon, He went not to the proud, the mighty, the famous, or the brilliant. He went to the humble, to the sick, to the unfortunate. He went right to the drunkard, the so-called weakling of the world. Well might He have said to us, unto your weak and feeble hands I have entrusted a power beyond estimate. To you has been given that which has been denied to the most learned of your fellows. Not to scientists or statesmen, not to wives or mothers, not even to my priest or minister have I given this gift of healing other alcoholics, which I entrust to you. It must be used unselfishly. It carries with it grave responsibility. No day can be too long. No demand upon your time can be too urgent. No case too pitiable. No task too hard. No effort too great. It must be used with tolerance, for I have restricted its application to no race, no creed, and no denomination. Personal criticism you must expect. Lack of appreciation will be common. Ridicule will be your lot. Your motives will be misjudged. Success will not always attend your efforts in your work with other alcoholics. You must be prepared for adversity, for what men call adversity is the ladder you must use to ascend the rungs towards spiritual perfection. And remember, in the exercise of this power, I shall not exact of you beyond your capabilities. You are not selected because of exceptional talents, and be careful always, if success attends your efforts, not to ascribe to personal superiority that which you can lay claim only by virtue of my gift. If I had wanted learned men to accomplish this mission, the power would have been entrusted to the physicians and the scientists. If I'd wanted eloquent men, there would have been many anxious for the assignment, for talk is the easiest use of all talents with which I have endowed mankind. If I had wanted scholarly men, the world is filled with better qualified men than you who would have been available. You were selected because you have been the outcast of the world, and your long experience as drunkards has made or should make you humbly alert to the cries of distress that come from the lonely hearts of alcoholics everywhere. Keep in mind the admission you made on the day of your entrance into AA, namely, that you are powerless, and that it was only your willingness to turn your life and will into God's keeping that relief came to you. And that's us. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. There are those who say that the word rarely ought to be never. There is a story going around that Bill agreed to that this was the only word in the big book he would want to change. And we're going to go to page 181. 181. The last full paragraph. If you think you are an atheist, an agnostic, a skeptic, or have any other form of intellectual pride, I love that phrase, which keeps you from accepting what is in this book, I feel sorry for you. If you still think you're strong enough to beat the game alone, that's your affair. But if you really and truly want to quit drinking liquor for good and all, and sincerely feel that you must have some help, we know that we have an answer for you. It never fails. If you go about it with one half the zeal you've been in the habit of showing when you were getting another drink. Why is that? Because your Heavenly Father will never let you down. When I have somebody new to work with, which is fairly often, I look them in the eye and I tell them this: if you do exactly what I tell you to do, if you don't drag your feet or make excuses, and I promise if you'll do that, I promise you I'll show you every step of the way exactly what you're doing and why. If you'll do that, I promise you that you're going to be just fine. And believe me when I tell you this is absolutely as true for those who are addicted to drugs, or those who are addicted to food or gambling or anything else. Because these 12 steps are spiritual principles which never fail us, and they solve our problems. The path is laid out in this book. They're saying this never fails if you thoroughly follow our path, what we did. We're saying to you, we know this will work for you. And they're right. This was the truth. Well, how about those who don't make it? Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. What don't we understand about the word completely? This is complete surrender. There doesn't seem to be any point in making a half surrender. I don't even know that that's possible to do that. I can't visualize what surrender, partial surrender would be, unless, of course, we were willing to give up, let's say, everything but our sex lives, for example. And I suppose there are people who have that problem. But going on, who are these people who will not completely give themselves to this program? Usually, men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. The constitutionally is a term which is used here to mean people who can't help themselves. It's they're so set up in their psyche and in their minds that they are unable to be honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Now, people have taken that rigorous honesty out of context, as if that's talking about don't dip your hand into the till. And every time you see your neighbor doing something wrong, get rigorously honest with them and tell them off. Make sure you get right in their face and make sure that they know what they have to do to reform their actions. Be rigorously honest with them, even if they didn't give you permission to do that. But those that feel good, because if they're wrong, we have to be right, don't we? Every time I make you wrong, I'm wrong. Every time I make you wrong, I'm wrong. This is a program of honesty with ourselves. That's the sine qua non. That's the bottom line of recovery. Look at this paragraph every time it's read and see and hear what it's saying to us. We don't recover if we're not willing or able to be honest with ourselves. Their chances are less than average. Now, how about our friends who come here diagnosed with all kinds of dread psychological and diseases and symptoms and whatevers that have been loaded up with whole cocktails of that you can line up the pills here about like soldiers in line? What about those folks? They have any chance? There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. In effect, look at these stories. They tell you in a general way what we used to be like, what happened and what we're like now. Why? Why did they do that? Why did they put their stories in here? Wasn't Bill's story and Jim's and Fred's story enough? The story of the jaywalker, wasn't that enough to convince people that they ought to do something about their alcoholism? Obviously they felt not. What did they feel and why did they put those stories back there? Because they knew that with the 39 stories, somewhere in those 39 stories, the new person is going to find themselves. They're going to find themselves. They're going to be able to say, yes, I'm one too. It's simple. The stories do two basic things. They help to break down the walls of denial. Alcoholism is a disease of denial. Our minds tell us there's nothing wrong with us. Our minds do not want to admit the truth, because that would mean that they would be then deprived. We would be deprived of our alcohol fix. And so we deny the truth. It breaks down the walls of denial. And the other thing that these stories do is to help us to have hope. Because look, we're reading all these stories, and here are people just like us, who are just as bad a shape as us, or maybe a whole lot worse, and they're saying, but looky here, I've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, and here's how I did it. And I truly believe that if I can do that, you can too. And so you see what's happened here with the first reading of the big book. The walls of denial come tumbling down, and hope springs up for those who are hopeless. That's why we read the whole book. That's why we give it to a newcomer and say, read this book. That's what it's telling us right here. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. If you decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it. Now, any length means exactly what it says. Several places in the big book this is repeated. For example, if we're balking at making some amends, the big book says, remember that we agreed in the beginning to go to any length for victory over alcohol. That's our agreement. That's our commitment. Whatever it takes. Comes first. Has to come first. Has to come first. If it doesn't, we just don't make it. You know, one of the things that happens around here so much of the time is that people get distracted from working the steps, and they're given all kinds of excuses why that's okay. It isn't okay. It cannot be okay. Our first priority has to be to go from a place of rebellion and defiance to a place of surrender, and we do that by working the steps. Then you're ready to take certain steps. The word then is very, very important. What does that mean? It doesn't mean next year, it means then. Then means right then. I'm ready. Okay, let's go to the steps. At some of these we balked. Why? Because we thought we could find an easier, softer way. But we could not. Wow. Anyway, we're ready to take the steps. Now, that means precisely that we are now ready to follow directions. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Especially, of course, fearless and thorough in the writing of our fourth step. This is where self-honesty, the absence of self-delusion, really kicks in. But then some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go, absolutely. All right. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. Alcohol, of course, is not any kind of an animate object. It cannot, has absolutely no power of itself to be cunning, baffling, and powerful, does it? What we're talking about is the alcoholic thinking. Our alcoholic minds are cunning, baffling, and powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. That's the first step. That's the first step. The first step tells us that we, without help, this is too much for us because we are powerless. Let's go to the next sentence. We're going to see the second step now. There is one who has all power. That one is God. There is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures avail us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We ask his protection and care with complete abandon. That is the third step. Now we begin to see just how powerful this chapter 5 is and why it's read at most meetings. If you believe already that there is a higher power out there, or if you believe in God, or God as you understand Him, good, because we've got a good start. And if you don't, then what I want you to do is to pray for the willingness to believe, because that's the only thing that's required to get started. Just be willing to believe that there just might be a power out there greater than you. And you see, what's happened here is, once having admitted our powerlessness, once having admitted that we could not stop on our own, now it becomes easier for us to contemplate trying to find a power which will stand between us and the booze. And that's what we're doing here. Now here's the way this works. All that has to happen for you to work the second step is that you come to believe. It's a belief. It doesn't mean that you're down on your knees, or that you're doing any kind of ritual stuff, or getting baptized or confirmed or doing anything. You go to church you want, you don't have to. You're not being asked to confess anything. All that you're being asked to do is to believe. Just to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity. And with further prayer, what happens? Well, we finally come to a point where we're willing to make that leap of faith. The way the big book describes it is this: we can take the bridge of reason and we can carry it from the old land of failure and slow suicide to the new land of faith. And we can follow that bridge of reason, and we can almost reach the new land. We can almost rationalize why we ought to be there, but not quite. It falls short. Bridge of reason does not carry me to the new land. So therefore we take our first leap of faith, and son of a gun, it works. The people there catch us. We feel something. Beginnings of a God buzz, I guess, is what's happening. We answer 3 questions. 2 of them appear on page 53. The third is the obvious follow-on question. The first question: God is either everything or He's nothing. What is your answer to be? And God is either is or He is not. What is your answer to be? And as we reach that point, if we can say God is and God is everything, then the third question, the follow-up question, is simple, isn't it? Well, if God is and God is everything, can you possibly have any doubt that He can restore you to sanity? Now notice what's happened here. We've gone from a place of rebellion and defiance. We've gone from a place of doubting or denying God. We've gone from a place where we could, with a straight face, say, yeah, there may be God out there, but He's too big to have anything to do with little me. There are billions of us in this world and other billions probably in other worlds. Why would this all-powerful God have anything to do with any individual? How can I be so pumped up with myself to think that this God has any concern about me as an individual? And how much faith did it take for you to leap off the end of the bridge of reason? That faith was just a leap, wasn't it? But what happened? You learned something from that. You learned that this is true. You learned that there's something there that cares about you, no matter what you call it. And so having reached this point of belief, I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Now I'm going to have to go a whole bunch further, aren't I? I'm going to have to take a major step now. I'm going to have to go from a place in the second step of believing that there is this power strong enough to restore my sanity, to a place in the third step where I'm become willing to turn my life and my will over to the care of this power. A huge step. It's going to be necessary for us to go further and to recognize and to understand that there's a lot more to being sober than simply the recognition of our alcoholism and the fact that we recognize the existence of God. So when we turn to page 60, we find 3 pertinent ideas. That we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. That probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. That God could and would if He were sought. Now, That last phrase is something we need to ponder, and I'd like to see some of us even meditate on this, because it's a direct promise that God can and will remove from us the obsession and compulsion to drink alcohol if we seek Him. A direct promise which happens to be true. Now the question comes, okay, how do I go about seeking God? A lot of us have tried in many different ways. Perhaps we've belonged to various churches or religious affiliations. Perhaps we've tried some of the metaphysical stuff. Perhaps we've gone to ashrams. Perhaps we've tried to find the old man on the mountaintop, find out what life is all about and all that stuff, and none of it worked. And we can say with some truth, I thought I was seeking God. The big book gives us the answer. We're going to seek God by working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, which means precisely that we're going to work the steps. It is through the steps that we're going to go from that place of rebellion and defiance to that place of surrender and obedience. It is through working the steps that we're going to find and to be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us from God. It is through the working of the steps that we're going to find God within us. And so, this is the path that we must follow. And the big book has led us right up to this point. And the next two words are being convinced. Now in the third step, those two words are of extreme significance. Being convinced of what? Well, we certainly know that we need to be convinced of everything that the first and second step stand for. And we've already gone through those. We can say without equivocation, I am convinced that that is true. But what about other things that we have read? We've read the big book. Hopefully we've read it more than once. And in the reading of the big book, we have found certain basic truths that have been enunciated over and over again. Am I convinced that all of these things are true? Am I convinced, having been around the rooms and having talked to people who have recovered from the seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, that the 12 steps have worked for them, and am I now convinced that if I am willing to work these steps, they will work for me? Now, therefore, being convinced that all these things are true, the big book says in the next breath, we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood Him. That's it. It is a decision. It is not surrender. It is the decision to surrender. It is the decision to do those things necessary to effectuate a surrender. It is a decision to petition God, offering our lives and our will to God, asking Him to take us into His care and protection. That's the decision. Now, how do we reach that decision? Well, the big book starts us out with an allegory, or let's say a description of a mythical person who turns out to be us. We find described for us at the bottom of page 60 and top of page 61. 4 lines up from the bottom of page 60. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show. Is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if people would only do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he's more likely to have varied traits. What usually happens, the show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more. He becomes on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious as the case may be. Still the play does not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure that other people are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? Is he not really a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well
Is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things he wants? And do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get from the show? Is he not, even in his best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? And it goes on to describe for us something which we do not want to face, but which must be faced and accepted if we are to complete the third step. And that is that we are responsible, that it is our selfishness and our self-centeredness which is responsible for our ills, for our failures, which is responsible for our lack of any spiritual development, which is responsible for us still being in spiritual kindergarten and emotional teenagers, many of us, which is responsible, in short, for all the failures of our lives. And it tells us that selfishness is the root of our troubles. And then it tells us this in the second paragraph on page 62. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making, that they arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. Why is that? Well, by this time we need to understand why that's so. Let's go back to basics again, shall we? We have an incurable, deadly, progressive illness. We cannot stop drinking, and if we don't stop drinking, we will die. The only way that we can stop drinking is to put a loving God between us and the booze. If we are continually filled with selfishness and self-centeredness, there is no room for God in our lives or in our thinking or in our soul. Therefore, if we do not rid ourselves of selfishness, there will be no grace, there will be no God, and there will be no recovery. That's why this selfishness will kill us. God makes that possible, makes it possible for us to be free of selfishness. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them, even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. Now the third step is described in the next 3 sentences. This is a how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. You see, what's happened here is that we've reached this point where by reading the book, by working the first 2 steps, by going to meetings, by being around people who've recovered, by praying, what we have come to understand is that our past failures, our spiritual bankruptcy, are a function of our own selfishness and self-centered way of living, that we have been trying in every way we could think of to play God. We were self-directed. We were making decisions based upon self, which have always led us into a place to be harmed. This is the way the big book puts it. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the Father, and we are his children. So you see how naturally we have come to this decision. It cannot be forced upon us. If you're a sponsee, you dare not try to force your sponsee to make this decision. It has to come naturally. It has to come as a matter of God's grace. But we do our part leading up to that grace. And what our part is that we do the work we can do. We get to meetings. We pray. We read the big book. We talk to people in recovery. So we've received the gift of the first step, the gift of the second step. And now we receive the gift of the third step, this decision. Now, once we've made this decision, then how do we go about implementing this decision? At the top of page 63, we have a paragraph which tells us where we're going. It lays out for us all the way back here in the third step, the promises which we will be receiving when we get to the ninth step. Does not purport to tell us what's going to happen after we do the third step. Now, by the way, we have worked the third step once this decision is made. And so therefore, what we're looking at now is the implementation of the third step, and we start that out with a prayer. And the prayer is on page 63, and it is in 4 sentences, each one of which is extremely important in and of itself. God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. This is an offer. It has not yet been accepted. God will accept this offer in His time. We're saying, here I am, God, take me. But am I presently able to be taken? In most cases, no, because I'm still blocked from God by all my defects and all of my guilts and all of my insanities. Nevertheless, I've offered without reservation for God to take me into His care, to use me, to build with me, and to do with me as He wants. We have held nothing back. It was voiced, as the big book says, without reservation. At this point, we are forming a partnership with God. We are asking Him for something, but we are likewise committing ourselves to do something, which is to go forward with the rest of the steps. Now, we just got through looking to see how devastating self can be. And so now we ask God, relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. This is our first acknowledgement in the big book of the reason that we are here. The reason we're here is not so that we can be healthy, wealthy, and wise and have a house on the bay and a 50-foot Matthews. Why we're here is to better do God's will. We are to take up the work that He ascribes to us. We're to carry His message. We are to be of maximum benefit to God and our fellows. That's why we're here. And when we're tied up in self, we cannot follow His will. Take away my difficulties. Well, we don't know what those are yet because we haven't done inventory, but we know that there's something dreadfully wrong. These difficulties the third step prayer talks about are our insanities, our defects of character, and our guilts. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help, of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. You see what's happened here? We're asking God to make examples of us so that we can be helpful to others, not of how great we are, but of how great He is. And then finally, may I do Thy will always. This is the first time we've seen this. We're going to find that repeated over and over again. Something that we do as we go through each day. Thy will, not mine, be done, God. What do You want me to do next, God? Please give me the power to carry it out. So you see that by this time, this great gift has been given and the decision has been made, and through our actions we have done those things necessary to implement that decision. So now we have the first, second, and third steps, and they've carried us this far. Now we know that there are so many things about us that need to be fixed, that need to be removed, that need to be changed. Knowing that we're blocked from God at this point, what do we do next? You see, it's led us directly up to the fourth step, hasn't it? We're going to take a moral inventory, searching, honest inventory. We're going to look at our past, and we're going to we're going to find out what it is that's wrong with us. What does the fourth step say? Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Now some people will say, oh, don't be in any hurry to work that. What's the big book say? Let's look at the top of page 64. It's pretty clear here, I think. Now, talking about the third step, though our decision, that's the third step decision, was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless, what is this, at once? Holy cow, at once? Followed by a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us? Why do we have to do that? Well, our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions, didn't we? At once. The third step prayer, boom, fourth step. Now, the fourth step, let it be known, is not an autobiography. It is not the answer to 697 questions, which I happened to see the other day. I shared this with you. One of those questions was, have you ever been caught masturbating? Can you imagine? Can you imagine? You saw that too, didn't you? Yeah. And I looked at that list of questions, 697 questions. I was talking to the guy who's been trying to work his four-step with these questions. I said, how long have you been working on this? He said, well, let's see, it's been about 4.5 months now. How far are you? I haven't gotten to the 300th question yet. I said, what have you learned? He said, nothing. I said, do you want to work the four-step? He said, yeah. I said, you want some help? He said, yeah. I said, okay, I'll show you what to do. I got a call the next day from his sponsor. What are you doing? You're stepping all over my sponsee. And I said, calm down, it's okay. Why don't you talk to him, see what he wants to do? But you ought to be bloody ashamed of yourself, son. Look what you're doing to him. Where in the world? Let me ask you a question, I asked him. Where's this in the big book? Where do you find any of this in the big book? Well, I don't work with the big book. Oh. The big book is outmoded. It was written by a bunch of old guys back there in the 30s. Mostly waspy guys. They're too old and it's all outmoded, and now we have modern stuff. Remember what it says on page 164? We have learned that we know but little, and more will be revealed to you and to us. And this has all been revealed to we who are modern. Some words like that. It wasn't quite that good. Anyway, I think his sponsee is probably going to work the fourth step the way it's set out in the big book. Here's the point, of course. The fourth step, first of all, we have to understand what it is. The fourth step is not an autobiography. It is a search for the truth about ourselves. It is not designed to indict us or to make us wrong or bad. It is to find out what it is that's happened and where we are today. What is it about ourselves that blocks us from God that we cannot change ourselves? Now you can forget all about 7 deadly sins. We don't deal with sin here. Besides, those sins have anything to do with defects. They have to do with sinful action. And we're not talking about that here. We're talking about defects of character. In order to find out what blocks us from God, we have to find out what our defects are and what our insanities are and what our guilts are. And those are the things which block us from God. And we have to do it right away. So as we look at the fourth step, we find that it is inspirationally designed to accomplish exactly that. And it will point out in widescreen, technicolor, stereophonic, and Dolby sound precisely what it is that's wrong with us. It's going to illuminate those twists of character, those deep, dark things about us which we have been denying and running from all of these years. And in principle, it is going to show us the 4 cardinal defects. That's my term, because I don't know what else to call them. Dishonesty, selfishness, resentment, and fear. If you look carefully at the directions for the fourth step in the big book, you will find that these are the 4 defects which are iterated and reiterated. And then when you look at the 10th step, you will find that again in the 10th step, these same 4 defects are iterated and reiterated. And then in the 11th step, again, the same 4 defects: dishonesty, selfishness, resentment, and fear. And therefore, it is easy for us, by reading the complete big book and looking at all the steps, to recognize that these 4 defects of character are the ones which are clearly illuminated and dug out by us working our 4th step. And that we therefore learn how to find them, and in our 10th step we can find them on a daily basis as they crop up, and in our 11th step each night we get a chance to review the day and see what's happened in light of those defects. These are the defects which will kill us. These are the defects which block us from God. And each and every one of them is fear-driven. For example, we are not angry or resentful unless we are threatened by somebody or something. When we do our resentment list, we find fear lies behind every anger, every resentment. We're not dishonest unless we're afraid of the results of being honest. We're not selfish or self-centered unless we're afraid that if we do not direct our own lives, that we won't get what we want, what we think we need, that life will be a shambles. Especially we're not going to get enough of entertainment and sex and fun and enjoyment and all the things that we claim to be entitled to. And so fear lies behind all these. Fear, we find as we do our fourth step, is our enemy. It's our only enemy. Fear is the devil himself, if we believe in the devil. If you want to really nail it down, the godfather of all of our defects of character is pride. And pride sends out fear as the hitman to kill us. And fear warps and perverts our natural instincts to a point where we have become literally insane. We become goofy. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, and that means the decision of the third step, to turn our life and our will over to the care of God. Though our decision was a crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. The two words, at once, mean exactly what they say. We've done our third step, we immediately commence our fourth step, at once. Our liquor was but a symptom. Please understand what this is saying. Alcohol and the ingestion of alcohol is a symptom of the disease of alcoholism. And alcoholism in its most basic form is a form of spiritual bankruptcy. So we're not talking about alcohol as being a cause, we're talking about it as being a symptom. Real important to understand this, the difference. Now here's the rule. We had to get down to causes and conditions. And to do that, then we're going to take inventory. Let's go to the second paragraph on page 64. Talking about the paragraph before talks about taking inventory in a business. Now it says we did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. That's a very, very important sentence. Look what it's telling us. That the root of our problems is selfishness and self-centeredness. On page 62, 2 pages back, it tells us precisely that. That the root of our trouble is selfishness, self-centeredness, and we can't get rid of self on our own. It also tells us that decisions based on self have put us in a position to be harmed. And so as we look at our four-step inventory, keep in mind that our primary search here is for self and selfishness, self-centeredness, self-centered fear, self-delusion, self-will, run riot. Okay? That resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. Why? Because deep resentments block us, absolutely block us from God. When we're walking around full of anger and rage and resentment and thoughts of revenge, we've taken that day and we've flushed it down the toilet. We've destroyed the day. Going on, from it stem all forms of spiritual disease, for we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. We can characterize that as spiritual bankruptcy. Now here's a little rule which sounds preposterous, and yet it's the absolute truth. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. And when you've been around here for a while, and some of you have, you've seen such miracles of physical and mental recovery that many times it's beyond the power of the doctors and psychiatrists to explain it. They just don't know how that possibly could have happened. So therefore, in dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. This means now that our inventory is going to be a written one. Everything that we're going to do on the fourth step is in writing. We do not take inventory in our heads. Think about it. If you owned a shoe store, would you go in the back room and try to inventory your stock and trade in your head? No, obviously not. If you start taking inventory about yourself in your head, you're going to find you're out there dancing with a clown before you realize it. And whatever it is you were supposed to be looking at in your head goes right by the boards. We got to get it out of our head and down on paper. And that's for the 4th step and the 10th step and the 11th step. There's a little ditty I made up and I love it. It goes very simply like this. The more you write, the better you feel. The more you write, the better you feel. You can expand on that all you want. Write it down. And as we go through our 4th step, we learn how to do that. So, in dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. We ask ourselves why we were angry. Let's talk about that. Institutions. IRS, police, church, college, IBM, the Elks, the Masons, and the Daughters of the American Revolution. Whatever it is, whatever institution you may have come in contact with that made you angry. Principles will be those things which you were taught, which you believed were basic to living your life, and it turned out that they were wrong and they led you astray, and you got in difficulty trying to follow other people's ideas of how you should live your life. Primarily, these principles will be based upon some kind of fear that you must do this or else, that if you don't do this, you will be in deep trouble, and we'll see to it that the prosecutors know all about you. Now, they may be heavenly prosecutors or they may be earthly prosecutors, but nevertheless, you're going to be in deep trouble if you don't follow these principles that we, over here, have laid down for you. And all of us were subjected to much of that. And then when we find that that stuff doesn't work, we can sometimes become very, very angry about it. In most cases, we ask ourselves why we were angry. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened, so we were sore, we were burned up. Okay. Those all relate in one way or another to our natural God-given instincts, which means that when our instincts are attacked by other people, it causes us to be fearful. It causes us anxiety. It is a threat almost always will result in fear. And fear warps and perverts our natural instincts. So if I am told that I am no damn good from the time I'm a little kid, if I'm told that I am ugly, that I'm dumb, that I'm never going to make anything of myself, and I'm told that often enough, pretty soon I come to believe it. I end up with zero self-esteem. And when our security is threatened in any way, now that includes, of course, our financial security, we get very angry. We get fearful. We get anxious. When our personal relationships are threatened, our personal relationships refer particularly to our instinct to be in the society of our fellows, to be accepted within our society, to be thought kindly of, to be admired. but mostly and most importantly to be accepted and not shunned and not pushed away and not rejected. Just think of the things that you've done to avoid rejection by your peers, the things that we do to somehow or another try to fit in. And you hear around the rooms that little phrase, I don't know where it came from, but whatever it is, we all seem to pretty much agree, that I never felt a part of. Well, not feeling a part of means that I have felt rejected. We need to say, I felt rejected, because that's exactly what's happened to us. And that's very painful. And of course, the interference with our sex relations, again, that's an interference with a natural instinct, the instinct for sex, which is very powerful. And if you want to test its power, just think back. How many times did you have to convince yourself to get sexually aroused when you had the opportunity? It just happens, doesn't it? Because it's instinctual, and it operates below the level of conscious thought. So when we see that, we begin to understand what these defects of character really are. They are these natural instincts which have been warped and perverted and twisted out of shape by fear. So the first thing we're going to do then is we're going to be looking at our resentments. Now, there are 4 parts to the 4th step. 4 parts. The first part is our resentment list. The second part is the list of our own wrongs and the harm we've done others. The third part is our fears list. And the fourth part is our sex inventory. First, resentments. Second, our wrongs. Third, our fears. Fourth, our sex inventory. Now, each of these 4 parts looks at a particular defect or several defects. Obviously, the first part, which is resentments, looks at resentments and fear. The second part looks at selfishness, dishonesty, and fear. The third part looks at fear, and the fourth part looks at selfishness and dishonesty. Okay? So that each of these 4 parts has very specific defects which it addresses. There are a couple of other things that come out of a proper 4th step. Let's examine what they are. These 5 things will result from doing a proper 4th step. First, we will lose our resentments. They will be gone. The resentments we carried in here with us will be gone, because in our 4th step and our 5th step we have the complete spiritual answer to resentments. We're going to pray for the people who harmed us, and we're going to ask God to make us willing to forgive. And by the time we finish our 4th step, the resentments will be gone. Second, we're going to commence to lose our fears. In our 4th step, our fears begin to fall from us. We begin to lose our fears. Third, we're going to have an ideal for our future sex life. That is, we're going to have an ideal for how we wish to conduct ourselves in our relationships. And by extension, that goes not only to our sex relations, but to our relationships with all people. Fourth, we're going to have a list of all the people we've harmed. You may not realize it, but within the 4th step, we complete our 8-step list, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 people that the 4th step doesn't dig out for us. But our basic 8-step list is done in the 4th step. Not only is the 8-step list done, but we have become willing and ready to make amends in our 4th step. So the basic aspects of the 8th step are already done in the 4th step. And number 5, we're going to have a list of our defects of character. We're going to have especially the 4 cardinal defects: dishonesty, selfishness, resentment, and fear. They're going to all show up like a big neon signs in stereophonic widescreen Technicolor and Dolby. There would be no doubt that they're right there in front of us. And so we're going to have that list of our defects, which we're going to carry with us into our fifth step. And it is in our fifth step that we're going to be admitting these defects and talking about the failures in our lives which led to these defects. They're killers because they block us from God. And without God in our lives, we don't make it. Let's always remember, when you're working with your sponsees, keep going back to basics with them so that they understand what in the heck we're doing here. Many resentments your sponsees will have carried with them all of their lives. Some of these resentments are so well hidden that they're barely recognizable. Many times the resentments only surface as a matter of deja vu, sometimes only in sporadic moments. Maybe there will be years between them surfacing. I like to think of resentments as a whole gang of termites which are chewing away at the foundations of my house. And they're down there buried in the wood, the subconscious. And I don't even know they're there until the floors start to collapse. Now, termites being the way they are, if we don't get them all out, they're going to go find themselves another queen and start over again. So we can very easily end up having another gang of termites very quickly. It's the same thing if you were to go to your physician who is about to operate on you for cancer of the stomach and say to him, "It's okay, doc, I'd like for you, it doesn't matter if you leave a little bit in there." Well, we can no more leave resentments than we can leave cancer, because resentments are cancerous. They eat us alive. This means then that we're going to have to find a way to identify all of those resentments which even appear to have disappeared. You see, your sponsee will most likely tell you, "I don't resent anybody. I don't have any resentments. I know that all of these things that people did to me were my own fault. But nevertheless, look at what you did to her. And no wonder she treated you that way. Therefore, you must not resent her." Oh, okay. Well, then I guess I don't resent her. Balderdash. We don't wish away resentments. They don't get talked out of resentments. We don't get rationalized out of resentments. We can hide them. We can be self-delusionary about them. We can rationalize them. We can excuse them. We can do everything we want to do to them. But it's just like a preposition. Resentments are like anything a rabbit can do to a hill, and you can't figure out every way that rabbit has to get into that hill. I don't care how smart a psychiatrist you got. And so we're going to have to go the other way. We're going to have to dig them out. We're going to find out what they are and why we have them. That why is so important, because it's always going to boil down to what they did to us or around us, which caused us to be fearful, to be angry, and thus to develop a resentment. Now, to do that, we need to review our entire lives. We cannot depend upon our memories in the sense of, whom do you resent right now? Well, let's see. Tom and Dick and Harry and Alice and a couple of other women I can't remember the names of. Also the Catholic Church, the cops, the IRS, and the Marine Corps. That's all you resent? Yeah, that's it. I don't have any other resentments. What about Mama? What about Daddy? What about Uncle Tom? What about Grandpa and Grandma? What about aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters, nieces, nephews, teachers, employers, girlfriends, boyfriends, wives, children, judges, jailers. What about the insurance man? What about your stockbroker? Tell me that you don't have resentments toward any of them. Well, maybe, but, well, let's find out. The way we're going to find out, we're going to go back and we're going to list all the people who have been important in our lives, all the way back as far as we can remember, starting with our families. Now you see why we're going to do this for two reasons. First of all, by doing that, we're not going to miss anybody. And secondly, because we're just starting our 4-step, and this is a good technique to remember with your sponsees, this will help them to jog their memory, because there's a process of association that goes on here. And the more they write down about people in their lives, the more people will pop into their memory. Not only that, but now events and circumstances begin to pop in. All sorts of things begin to come into memory that were not there, or were hidden. And so we really begin the process of memory rehabilitation by doing this. Once we have the names of everybody down, obviously, well, it would be a rare case where we have resentment toward everybody on that list. So we're going to find out what they did to us. To do that, we have to ask ourselves certain questions about every person on that list. We ask ourselves, did this person anger me at some time in the past? Did this person harm me in any way? Did this person wrong me? And here's a good one. Did this person threaten me in some way? And then there's a fifth question that we use because it will ferret out the resentments that we don't want to remember, we don't want to own up to. There's a very interesting twist of mind that goes along here, and as a sponsor you should know that this will kick in with a lot of your people. They have been hurt and hurt badly and have developed anger and resentment toward people upon whom they depended. This would be especially, for example, parents. Now, it's very, very difficult on the one hand to recognize the faults and the harm that's been done by a parent upon whom we depend. And we don't, and it's even worse to try to have to admit it to somebody. Because we're saying, well, why in the world did I permit this to happen? Well, you did, you had to, you were dependent upon that person. We cannot, it's very difficult for us to think badly about someone upon whom we depend. How many times are you going to be talking to somebody who has been beaten around the head and shoulders by a spouse or significant other, who will come right back and say, but I love him. Well, hoo-ha. There are things that are going on here that we got to recognize. And love is not enough. I love my parents. Yes. What did your dad do to you that caused you to be angry, if anything? Well, let's see, he beat me, he didn't take care of me, he didn't play ball with me, he didn't bring home enough money for us to eat, he told me I was stupid and ugly. Oh. And so those things that he did to you, what we're going to do now, because you don't want to recognize the resentment, what we're going to do is we're going to go over here on our resentment list, going to write down the things he did to you. And out of that writing will come the realization on your part that yes, indeed, there's a deep-seated resentment there. Now, another thing you want to be sure you emphasize with your sponsees, this 4-step resentment list is not intended as an indictment of anybody. We're not indicting them. We're not making them bad people. All we're looking for is what did they do that caused us harm and fear and resentment. And so when we find somebody who's not willing to recognize the harm that was done, the fifth question we ask is, was this person unfair to me? Now you see, unfairness is not a pejorative, it's not an indictment. It doesn't mean bad, it just means unfair. And I've had sponsees who wouldn't answer yes to any harm or wrong or threat or anger, but they would answer yes all the way down the line to unfair. Well, now, think about it for a second. When somebody treats you unfairly, isn't it usual in your experience that this would anger you in a way? It would discomfort you at least in some way. So when we write about what was unfair, then we find out that it was truly harmful. We just didn't want to admit it. We did not want to say that anybody was wrong or bad. Somebody's gotten to us ahead of time and told us we can't do that. And we've accepted that as being true. So now by this time we know exactly what we're going to write about. Now this brings us down to something else, and I want you to remember this, burn it into your forehead. There is no fourth column or fifth column in the resentment list, in spite of the fact that there are all these forms out there floating around from people who pretend that they have taken these directly from the big book. But they have not. They've added their own predilections, their own view of how it ought to be. They have failed to recognize one of the most important facts about this resentment list. It is designed specifically for us to uncover the wrongs that others have done us. These steps, these parts of the four-step require a narrative description. Let's look at this on page 67. We resolutely looked at our own mistakes. Now there are 4 questions here. They're headed up by the word where. It doesn't say, were they? Or did I? Or was I? It says, where had I been selfish? Where had I been dishonest? Where had I been self-seeking? Where had I been frightened? The word where means that we must have a narrative description of where we did this, what we did. What did we do that was selfish? What did we do that was dishonest? What did we do that was self-seeking? What did we do that was frightened? So here's what we do. We go over here. The first person on our resentment list way over here is Dad. Now we're going to move Dad over here. Now we've already gotten rid of our resentments of Dad. They're gone because we prayed for him and we asked God to make us willing to forgive what he did to us. We don't hate him anymore. Now it's time when we can look at Dad. What did I do? All right, with respect to Dad, in my relationship with him, where had I been selfish? I need to write down my selfishness and the instances of selfishness. I need to write down my actions and my motivations and my attitudes. When we finish that, with respect to Dad, my relationship with Dad, where had I been dishonest? We finish that. Where had I been self-seeking? And where had I been frightened? Now we go down a little bit further. In my relationship with my dad, where was I to blame? We got 5 questions we're going to answer about each person on that resentment list. Separate and apart from the resentment list. Got it? Now what have we got? We have identified our resentments in our first list. Now we are identifying dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. This means that by the time we finish the second part of the 4-step, we're well along the way to discovering the 4 cardinal defects: selfishness, resentment, dishonesty, and fear. In examining what we've done which has been harmful to others, we have begun to compile our 8-step list. You see, because we've been identifying the things we did which we need to make amends for. And we will also have begun to be willing to set these matters straight. Look at the bottom, look at page 67 again. The last sentence in that second full paragraph: we admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. That's the 8th step, guys. We've identified the people we've harmed and we've become willing to make amends. You see how this works? This is all happening at one time here in the 4th step. You can begin to see just how critical this 4th step is to be done with.
The third part of the 4th step is our fears list. We're going to inventory our fears. Now, you would say, well, look, wait a second. I did my resentment list and I found the fears associated with my resentments. I did the list of my own faults, and with respect to the people on my resentment list, I found more fear. Why is it now that I must do a separate fears list? Well, the reason is simply this. We're not going to leave one single fear unturned. We're going to turn over every rock that might have a fear under it, because these things are so insidious. Let's see what it says here at the bottom of page 67, last full paragraph. Notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties of Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, employer, and the wife. That's referring to the resentment list on page 65. Listen to this now. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence shot through with it. What a fantastic word picture that is. Now then, that's the problem. We've got these fears, and relying upon the big book as we do to continuously lead us in the right direction and give us the solution. Let's go to the second full paragraph on page 68. And these 2 paragraphs I commend to you as being 2 of the most beautiful and powerful and important paragraphs in the whole big book, because only tangentially do they refer to fear. These paragraphs deal with you and me in all aspects of our lives. Perhaps there's a better way we think so, for we are now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. Oh, I hope so. I hope so. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We are in the world to play the role He assigns. What did we ask for in the 3rd step prayer? Offer to you to do with me and build with me as thou wilt. Unconditional offer. Now this next sentence is really, really important. Just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us, and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. We never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. I feel sorry for those in the rooms who do. We can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. By the way, this program is not a program for sissies. If we don't have the courage to face ourselves, we can't make it. We never apologize for God. Now we go right back to the 3rd step prayer again. Excuse me? Instead, we let We never apologize for God. Listen to this now. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. That's what we ask God to do for us in the third step. Pray. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. That's what we ask God to do for us in the third step. Prayer, wasn't it? To make examples of us, of His power, His love, and His way of life, by taking away from us our difficulties. So it tells us here again that we're letting God demonstrate through us what He can do. Now here's the solution to our fears. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be, and once we commence to outgrow fear.